Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Thanks for taking the time. I know we are in between you and lunch. I want to congratulate TiE, first of all, for spinning up a cybersecurity track, not just because cybersecurity is near and dear to our hearts, but we think it's the right contextual conversation around AI and ML. So congratulations to TiE. Raman already introduced us a little bit, but what I want to mention is one cool thing about Dr. Zulfikar Ramzan, or Zuli as we call him, is that he did his Ph.D. at MIT under Ron Rivest, the R in RSA. So a cool anecdote or a factoid for you. So that's his claim to fame. My only claim to fame is I just share the first name initial with R. So now you know who to pay attention to during our conversation. We just wanted to have a conversation today about the interplay of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. So that's the topic at hand, and just some food for thought. Look, RSA, we've been around for 35 years, as Raman mentioned. We are known for the conference we spin up in San Francisco, the largest cybersecurity conference, and we are known for tokens. But we are a different company today. We are helping organizations manage digital risk. That's what we are about. And as we do that, we have realized the importance of leveraging data and machine learning and AI. So what I'm conveying to you is this topic is very contextual for RSA, the company. And we'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek in terms of the types of conversations that we're having inside of RSA and with other industry leaders in cybersecurity. The other thing I'll mention is, as was mentioned by the panel earlier, AI, much like any technology, is as much a target as it is a weapon. And it is a weapon both for the offense and the defense. So that's the right orientation to think about AI. And in terms of framing any other problems. So with that, why don't, Zuli, how about we get into a conversation and try to make sure our audience here is intrigued enough to stay on and not run away to eat lunch.
Yes, and thank you to organize for delaying lunch by half an hour. We appreciate that we're not competing with your stomachs. So by the way, this is great. Normally Rohit asks me all the hard questions. Now I get to actually ask him some hard questions as well. So I'm excited about that too. So maybe I'd like to start off with, obviously, RSA has been around 35 years, the longest running pure play cybersecurity brand, and one of the first companies in the private sector to talk about cybersecurity. We've seen many ebbs and flows over time. From your vantage point as president, you get to see this incredible horizon. How is RSA thinking about security more fundamentally before we talk about security and AI?
Sounds great. So I think the essence of the answer there is the word risk. So the right way we believe to think about cybersecurity is to think of it as a risk management problem. And I say that if necessity is the mother of invention, then risk is the mother of insurance. So the fact that cyber insurance is into the multi-billion dollars premium means cyber risk is important. The right way to think about security is to take a risk orientation. Why? Because cybersecurity is a high-velocity sport. I use basketball analogies because we are in Warriors country. It's all about moving fast and protecting the paint. If you think about the defense strategy of basketball, move fast, protect the paint. What does that mean? Protect the paint? Protect the most important area. You have to know what's most important. You have to know your business context and focus your energy. All security teams anywhere on this planet are overwhelmed with what they have to deal with. So the only solution is to prioritize ruthlessly, protect the paint, using business context, take a risk orientation. So if you take business risk, apply that to your security posture, you will be much more effective. Your security posture will be more effective. Conversely, as was addressed in the panel earlier, the biggest other challenge for cybersecurity teams is to translate cyber risk into business terms, because 89% of the boards around the world are having cybersecurity related conversations. They're asking, are things good, bad, getting better or worse? And so far the conversations had been subjective. We need to quantify cyber risk, and therefore again, a risk orientation to security is paramount, because it'll help inform the board and the business stakeholders to figure out what risks are worth taking.
So you mentioned right now this notion of thinking about security in business terms and taking a risk orientation. So now maybe going down a level, when you look at artificial intelligence at a business level in terms of people's adoption of AI, how do you see that playing out at a business level?
At a business level. So I'll attempt to do something foolish, which is to try to imitate the unimitable Michael Dell. The line he uses is, if AI is the rocket ship that'll power the transformation of our world into a more digital future, data is the fuel. And there are myriad use cases around the world across every industries where data being harnessed as fuel can transform the products and services and capabilities that any organization offers. And if you think about any organization, they offer products and services that generates data. And if you have AI and machine learning to harness insight from the data to improve your products and services, that's a virtuous cycle. And the faster you can move on that virtuous cycle, the more competitive you will be, the more successful you will be, and that is the essence of business and organizations going forward. So I think, I've touched on some of the business aspects of cybersecurity, Zuli. What I would maybe take the conversation towards is, in your eyes, what are some of the cybersecurity specific challenges as it pertains to leveraging AI in the business world?
Yeah, so it's interesting when we think about it for a moment. When you look at AI, right, we talk about the notion of data, and this came up over and over again. AI is garbage in, garbage out. If you have the right data, you can have a good opportunity to make meaningful inferences, which means that if you start talking about collecting all your interesting data and putting it in one place, that creates a phenomenal opportunity for threat actors to go and wreak havoc on that data. And that's a problem we haven't quite solved yet in cybersecurity. There's been some great research on trying to protect data. Obviously, encryption algorithms and RSA is really well known in that space, have been around for a long time. But where encryption starts to fail is encryption is not good at dealing with data in use. It's good at dealing with data at rest. And AI, by definition, is trying to glean meaningful insights from data and using that data effectively. So I think that, to me, would be the paramount challenge that has to be solved. We've seen some advances in areas like homomorphic encryption and other areas that try to solve the problem of leveraging data as it's in use, but quite frankly, the hype is maybe outpacing the reality of those technologies in the sense that they're not practical enough, nowhere near practical enough for day-to-day usage. So that to me is where I think I would really start in terms of thinking about AI and security. Great.
I'm remembering a quote by the science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, and he had said, look, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We've heard AI and its use, and it's often, I guess the proponents of the technology often imply that it's magical and will unleash this, fourth industrial revolution. What's sort of the more pragmatic way, perhaps, to look at it, and with a cybersecurity lens?
Yeah, and in fact, that concept really scares me, right? Whenever I hear about any new technology that people don't understand, I find that people's optimism around new technology is inversely proportional to the understanding of how that technology works. And by the way, with blockchain is another great example of that same optimism versus reality situation going on. So when I look at AI, I think one of the biggest challenges I worry about is that, let's say today you decide to deploy a system that uses AI. The reality is that as you get more and more sophisticated in your AI techniques, fewer and fewer people understand why those techniques work the way they do and what results you're going to get. And whenever you see any type of lack of clarity, whenever there's confusion or complexity, that is the breeding ground for threat actors. Threat actors thrive in murky environments. Security and complexity are often antithetical to each other. And so when you look at AI specifically, imagine for a moment that you collect all this data and you put it in one place, and you start running some interesting machine learning algorithms on that data. What happens if a threat actor comes around and makes some small modifications to your data? Well, now you're going to get a model that is reflective of bad data, which means the model will start making bad decisions. However, if the model uses really sophisticated techniques, imagine it's a deep learning based model that no one really understands, that means that no one can really tell that the model is behaving in a way that's been compromised because no one really understands why it works in the first place. And so I could imagine situations in which advanced threat actors can come in with subtle modifications, completely change the way your organization makes decisions in a way that very few people can actually detect. Now, this is not theoretical. I mean, we've already started to see some research in this area. For example, there was a paper written recently that showed that some autonomous vehicles could be fooled using duct tape on signs. So imagine you took a stop sign and you put duct tape in just the right areas, To the human being, it would still look like a stop sign, but you can start fooling AI systems into thinking that stop sign is a speed limit sign. And by the way, autonomous vehicles behave very differently when they see a speed limit sign versus a stop sign. And that's just one theoretical example. Just a couple of weeks ago at the RSA conference, we had a whole session on this topic. And one researcher figured out how to create a pair of glasses that if you put them on, you could completely fool an image recognition system into completely thinking that one person was somebody entirely different. And the glasses just had some color in the right places, because these models are often very brittle. And if you understand how they work at a deep level, if you spend that time, you can fool them quite easily. So I think that there, to me, lie some really incredible challenges. But you know what? I think we've talked a lot about the idea of how AI is difficult to implement in practice. We've talked about AI as a weapon, so to speak, or as a target. But I want to talk about it as a weapon for a moment. I'd love to see your perspective. I think there's a lot of opportunity in leveraging AI in cybersecurity. And do you have a perspective on that? And where do you see RSA going in that direction?
Absolutely. And just to kind of summarize the very important point you made around the weaponization of data. Traditionally, we had weaponization of data in terms of weaponizing it to brainwash humans, fake news, right? In terms of the feeds that we see on our social media, what you perceive and see influences how you think, and therefore you can influence elections for the most powerful office in the world. But the same concept is equally applicable to machine brains, because increasingly organizations are going to be powered by machine brains. So therefore, by weaponizing or tampering with data that is fueling those brains, you can brainwash machines into doing things you don't want them to do. That's the target aspect of AI. But AI definitely is a remarkable weapon for us, the good guys, to fight the good fight. And by the way, we have been doing this for a while. At RSA, just to cite an example, since 2005, we have been using AI and machine learning technology for the cause of fraud and risk intelligence, serving financial services organizations, e-commerce vendors, and healthcare organizations in terms of mitigating fraud. So it's been around for a while. Arthur Miller coined the term machine learning back in 1959. So the concept's been around. The applicability of it, because of awareness as well as Moore's law and the technology aspect, and the volume of data that is needed to sufficiently drive the level of learning that is needed, that is markedly more enhanced. In terms of key use cases that I can think about, I always go back to the data aspect. So if you think about spam detection, malware detection, those have been classic use cases for machine learning. Fraud and risk intelligence have been classic use cases. I think some of the emergent use cases that are very powerful, especially in the digital world, the first one is risk-based authentication or risk orientation around identity. And by this I mean that depending on the level of risk, you basically either step up or step down the level of authentication or the level of friction that is required. Why is this important? Because in the world of security today, in the digital world that we live in, we want all the security, but we also want all the convenience. Users do not want friction. So therefore, AI can be a massive, powerful force for us to dial up security and convenience based on the level of risk. Again, do machine learning and do things like biometrics, do things like bionomics to figure out how when Zuli is logging in, how he typically uses his mouse or how quickly he types. There are very, very interesting models around identity-based risk solutions that are now informed with biometric and bionomics data feeds, therefore making them remarkably more useful today, more so ever than yesterday. And finally, the holy grail of the power of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity is what we call the intelligent SOC. Or as Ram in the previous panel was addressing, the driverless SOC. That is the holy grail. I think we are still in, if you think about autonomous vehicles, and listen to Elon Musk, he'll say, hey, we are in level 2 autonomous vehicles, and we have to get to level 5. So today we are in the sort of the humans assisted with machine technology phase, even in the SOC. I think the driverless SOC is possible in the future. I hope Ram is right, that it comes about in 5 years. I'm not as convicted around the 5 years period, but I do see it happening at some point in the future. A level 5 driverless SOC is going to happen eventually. So that's some of the power of the good in terms of applicability of AI in the world of security.
Yeah, no, in fact, those are great examples. I think each example you mentioned, quite frankly, we've already gotten to a point where we've gotten the previous version to work correctly. Like, for example, you mentioned the idea of risk-based authentication for organizations. We've already done that quite successfully in the banks, for example. Like, how many people here, last time you go to your bank's website, you type your password in. I'll tell you a secret. Your bank doesn't care that you typed your password in. The reason they don't care is because they assume somebody who's not you already knows your password. And that's a reasonable assumption for, I think, the vast majority of the population. And so what they look at is all these other factors. What time of day did you log in? Where did you log in from? What do we know about the context, about the type of device that you used, about the actions you took? And it's that amalgamation of attributes to which machine learning techniques are applied to be able to identify, is this likely to be Rohit or not? Now, by the way, I think in that one case, people kind of prefer friction, because if I went to my bank's website and they never asked me for my password, I might get really nervous. But I think we may get to a point at some point where we might see that.
We want all the friction that is possible in terms of between our money and any threat actors.
Yes. Right. So there's maybe a bit of security theater. I think sometimes security theater is used in certain cases to make people feel better.
Absolutely. Zuli, you triggered one thought in my head, which is, and it was alluded to in the previous panel, in terms of where the applicability of AI is clear, but where should you apply AI? At what layer in the stack? Do you do it more upstream, or do you do it more downstream? If you think about the attack surface that we typically deal with, the most profound attack surface is the weakest link in security, which is the human identity, right? Then there is the endpoint, which is the other typical point of ingress for the bad guys. Then there is the network, then there is the data center and all the applications and data that lives over there. So that's the attack surface. And there are a lot of solutions that have come about that are actually applying machine learning to each sliver. So you have EDR tools that are saying, hey, I'm going to do, move fast, protect the faint. I want to move fast, and I want to detect all the data on the endpoint and discern anomalies over there. Machine learning can certainly assist, but what it's giving you is a faster sense of visibility around incidents from an endpoint perspective. If you think about the attacker, they don't care about the silos of your infrastructure. They're launching campaigns where they'll perpetrate attacks on every aspect of the attack surface. And an incident here on the identity side can be inextricably linked to an incident here on the network side, which might be interlinked to an incident over there on the data side. Unless you can see it holistically, your machine learning is only as valuable as the sliver of the infrastructure or the attack surface that you apply machine learning to. So our philosophy inside of RSA is that before you layer insight and automation and AI on top, first you got to get to pervasive visibility. Take all the facets of the attack surface, convert that to metadata, maybe enrich that data and solve a partial set of the labeling challenge so you can exercise both supervised and unsupervised learning, and then layer AI on top. That's a more capable way. That's how I think the driverless SOC comes about. If we continue to operate in the silos of the attack surface, we'll be stuck in the level 2, level 3 of the driverless SOC vision.
Right. Actually, you allude to something really important, which is when I think about, and I've had the benefit or maybe the challenge of trying to get AI to work in real life in cybersecurity now for probably close to a decade and doing it across various environments. And there's a series of best practices I discovered maybe the hard way.
Would love to hear, as a practitioner, Zuli, what would you say? So maybe two-part question. Part one, AI. You've had a chance to implement AI in myriad different scenarios. So not cybersecurity, but general applicability of AI. What are some of the considerations that any practitioner should have
I was hoping I'd ask you all the hard questions today. You're asking me the hard ones today. So I just didn't work out that well in my mind. Maybe I did a bad job of coming up with good questions. but
Still
to start
got
off
10 minutes.
Okay, yeah, I guess I have to. So yeah, I think in terms of kind of best practices, what actually has worked well. There was something alluded to in the earlier panels that I want to double click on. People get so caught up in this final classifier. How big is your neural network? How many layers does it have? And so on and so forth. And engineers love to tweak these parameters. I mean, they spend hours and hours and hours tweaking very small parameters, and nobody pays attention to the data and where it comes from. So I think first thing you have to focus on is good data. Now look, I'm going to say that's a bit of an oxymoron. In the real world, there's no good data. Only place good data exists is in academic papers. So if you want to make this work in real life, you've got to not think about whether your data is good or not. It's almost certainly not good. You've got to think about what compensating controls you put around the fact that your data is imperfect, and how do you account for that in the rest of your system. Now, the second thing, which I didn't hear talked about a lot, but I think it's fundamentally important, is that you can't just have good data on its own. You need to have good domain expertise to know what to look for in that raw data. Machine learning algorithms typically don't work on just raw data. They typically find ways to extract features from that raw data, and then they apply an algorithm that tries to figure out how to combine those features. And so feature extraction, which relies on domain expertise, is the second most thing that's critical. And you alluded to it when you said that you collect data and you enrich it. So one classic example, let's say I want to figure out whether a particular website is good or bad. Okay, that's a classic example in cybersecurity. You're looking at network traffic. Someone's going to a particular site. Is that site good or bad? If you ask anybody sitting inside of RSA Security Operations Center, what's the first thing you're going to do if you want to make that determination? You go and do a whois lookup on that site and see how long it's been around. More often than not, malicious sites tend to have very short lifetimes. They're not around for very long. And more often than not, legitimate sites tend to have long lifetimes. It's a pretty good indicator. If you had to pick one indicator, it's a good one. Now look, I can analyze data all day long about URLs, but unless somebody told me to do a whois lookup and enrich that data, there's no way an algorithm would figure out how to make that work. And so one little piece of human intervention, one insight from a human about what to look for, can go a tremendously long way. So you start off with the right kind of data, then you look at the right types of features, and then you figure out what classifier you want to use. And by the way, here's the dirty story that nobody tells you. If you get the right data and the right features, the classifier almost doesn't matter. It's going to be within a fraction of a % of each other. In fact, quite frankly, I'd rather use a poor classifier that I can understand and spend time on data and features, because here's what's going to happen. If something goes awry, if something messes up, the odds are you're not going to have a Ph.D. in computer science or in machine learning going to a customer scenario to fix it. It's going to be somebody in customer support. It might be a sales engineer. And they've got to figure out what went wrong. And so if you have very complex models, at some point the end-to-end system starts to break down. And that matters even more when you talk about adversarial notions, which I can double-click on at some point later. But I think that in and of itself is a whole topic of discussion. But I think the second thing that's really critical in that vein is that explainability, which we talked about earlier. If you see a result, I don't think we're going to get to level 5 anytime soon. So if we're going to be at level 2 or level 3, we have to be in a world where humans augment machine learning and vice versa. And that only works effectively if you can understand what those models mean, and you can start to understand when they might be doing things that you wouldn't expect because your data might be ineffective or something along those lines. And I've found many situations where I'm the first person to identify a bug in the product because I see the data. And only once I've identified it can we go back and fix things from the start.
Awesome, great insights. Thank you, Zuli. Maybe now let's hone in on the cybersecurity domain. So you talked about some general principles or thoughts. How about cybersecurity? Any special considerations in terms of use of AI within cybersecurity? Any anecdotes, stories to share?
Yeah, so I think maybe a couple of broad points. So the first point, and this was alluded to in the earlier panel, which was that most data in the real world is good, right? Most credit card transactions are legitimate. Most files on people's computers are legitimate. In fact, if I had to kind of put a rough number on it, now this is going to be the Malcolm Gladwell type of number, 10,000 to 1. For every 10,000 legitimate transactions, we see maybe one illegitimate one. And by the way, that number I've measured across different security domains, and it seems to be pretty accurate, which means if you're trying to build a system to detect something malicious, you have to sidestep 10,000 good things to find that one malicious thing. And if by accident you call one of those good things malicious because your AI is not quite perfect, that can cause a lot of havoc in most organizations. I was talking to one of our customers recently. They run a major international airport, and they run security for that airport. And they told me, look, if we have an incident and we can't resolve it, that means a plane can't take off from the ground. And so imagine you have 10,000 good things and you call a few of them bad by accident because your AI went a bit nutty or got a bit aggressive. That's 4 or 5 planes that can't take off from the ground. And by the way, airports are in the business of making sure planes take off. And so you're impeding the airport's fundamental business. And so to me, that class imbalance issue is an important one to consider. And oftentimes people talk about numbers like, I have a 0.1% false positive rate and 100% detection rate. None of that matters if 10 out of 11 things you talk about are mistakes. And so I think that's number one consideration. The number two consideration is that cybersecurity is not like chess or like Go, where you have a static set of rules that you can optimize for. We are dealing with sentient adversaries who are purposefully trying to trick us every time, who are adapting constantly. And in a world like that, you have to rethink how you apply AI, because AI was not meant to deal with scenarios in which there's malicious behavior. And by the way, when I think about the ubiquity of AI, that is the thing I worry about the most, is people are not thinking about the adversarial scenarios. But guess what? When something is out there enough, there will be scenarios where adversaries will get in play. And in fact, I do have a personal anecdote on this. A number of years ago, I'd been building some AI systems, and we had about 200 million users who were getting good data across the board. And I had an idea for augmenting that system. And this was a system at the time that was trying to figure out whether files were good or bad. It was a file reputation system. And what I started to observe is most programs are digitally signed. In other words, Microsoft will digitally sign their files, Adobe will digitally sign their files, and so on and so forth. And I said, look, if I know something about the files that are being signed, I can start to make an inference about the person signing those files. So if I see somebody signing only good files, I assume it's a good signer, and vice versa. I thought this would be a good way for me to figure out how to find additional malware and also additional good files. So I started working on a system. This was kind of a skunkworks project. I didn't tell anybody about it. So I was kind of analyzing a bunch of data. I had this spreadsheet with some interesting ideas in it. And what I started to notice was that as I collected data, I saw really two types of certificates. On the top of the spreadsheet, I had certificates that were generally signing good things. So imagine like Adobe or Microsoft. Everything that's signed by these guys is very popular, very well known, very high reputation, very clearly, top tier software providers. On the bottom half of the spreadsheet was the opposite, right? I saw people who were signing a lot of one-off files, strange things, a lot of low reputation files. And those people tended to be adware providers, spyware providers, the kind of people you would expect, clearly are not the right kinds of people you want to interact with. But there was one line on my spreadsheet, it was line 23, I remember it vividly. On line 23 of my spreadsheet was a signer who was signing some good things and some bad things. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Why would a legitimate software vendor have a bunch of popular applications and then a whole bunch of one-offs that can't be explained? Now, as I mentioned earlier, look, in these situations, sometimes I think, hey, maybe my data is wrong, maybe my approach has some flaw in it. I kind of spun my wheels for a bit. Eventually, I left the company, did a startup, and forgot completely about this particular problem.
Line 23.
Line 23. That's the one thing I remember about that spreadsheet, because I spent many hours staring at that line, seeing if I could make sense out of it. And then at one point, a few months later, I read about a threat called Stuxnet, a military-grade cyber weapon that was used to attack a nuclear power facility. And in particular, Stuxnet was used to compromise the centrifuges in that facility and modify the fan speed to effectively destroy the centrifuge. Remarkable threat. Now, Stuxnet was digitally signed by the Realtek system certificate, which was line 23 of my spreadsheet. And so here I was, I thought I knew what I was doing. I'd reverse engineered malware before. I'd been in cybersecurity a long time, staring at the first military-grade cyber weapon, and I had no clue what it was. No clue whatsoever. And I point that out because that means that no matter how hard we try, if we're dealing with sentient adversaries, to stay one step ahead of them, we can't just rely on a static set of techniques or on any one type of approach alone. And so I have to look at AI in that context. I do believe AI will move the needle in cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it's going to move the needle as much as many people want you to believe in the hype cycle. But I think we have to continue to invest in it to find opportunities to make it better.
Thank you. That was a fascinating story, Zuli. I do agree with you. AI will be a powerful force for us, the good guys, in the world of cybersecurity. It has tremendous capacity to augment the human capacity of the human defender. Much like your example, the insight that you had and the thought process you went through, you were at the brink of spotting the first cyber weapon in a military, industrial control setting. Look, I'm delighted to be in the company of dreamers and entrepreneurs. I just hope that, again, another Arthur C. Clarke quote. The only way, we think about how can you discover the limits of what's possible. The only way to do that is to venture a little bit past the limits into the impossible. So I hope each of you, as it pertains to cybersecurity, leverage the power of AI and ML to treat a little bit beyond what we think is possible. And through that, we shall unleash a massive force that can help tame this almost untenable battle that we face in cybersecurity, where digital risk keeps escalating. It feels overwhelming. But I think if we apply a risk orientation, meaning focusing on what's important, and apply that in the concepts of AI and ML in the right way, along the lines of what Zuli was indicating, to augment the capacity of the human defender, I think we have a shot at solving cybersecurity, and that shall be a beautiful world if you're able to unleash it. I want to thank you for your time, and I want to get you to your lunch. Thanks again, and delighted to talk to you. Actually, yeah, I'm happy to take a few questions if there are any. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.